Have you ever wondered how a hospital actually, knows the surgeon operating on you is qualified? I mean, really think about it for a second.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild thing to think about.
Right. You're lying there on a gurney, the anesthesia is kicking in, and some person in a surgical mask leans over you with a scalpel. You are placing your actual life in their hands.
And you just completely trust them.
Exactly. You trust them, but like, why? It's not like the hospital just did a quick Google search before rolling you into the OR or check to see if they had a nice LinkedIn profile.
No, definitely not.
Behind the scenes, protecting you while you sleep, there is this intense, high-stakes, almost invisible shield of bureaucracy that is designed entirely to keep you safe.
It is a massive, complex, and frankly, exhausting system. And what's fascinating here is that as a patient, you never see it.
Right, you're totally oblivious to it.
Exactly. You just see the final result, the doctor walking into the room. But the sheer mechanical effort, thousands of man-hours required to legally and safely get that doctor into that room is staggering.
Staggering.
Yeah.
And that machinery is exactly what we are taking a deep dive into today. We've got a huge stack of sources here.
We really do.
We're looking at a massive 2020 credentials policy from Las Palmas del Sol Healthcare, a really practical credentialing checklist from Grace Point, and some intense career and study guides from an MSS, HC Pro, and Med Trainer.
Plus, we have that recent February 2026 legal newsletter from JD Supra.
Yes, which details a massive regulatory earthquake that is currently shaking up this entire system. So our mission today is to demystify this hidden world of healthcare credentialing, privileging, and peer review, and then figure out how this controversial new oversight model is changing all the rules right now.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the new 2026 regulations, we need to understand the foundation, right? The jobs and processes that act as the bouncers at the hospital door.
The gatekeepers, essentially.
Right. So can you define the fundamental difference between credentialing and privileging? Because, I mean, I hear those thrown around interchangeably all the time, but they're very different animals.
Right. They are entirely different steps in the process, yeah. And understanding the distinction is pretty crucial. Credentialing is the foundational step. It's the rigorous, exhaustive background check.
Okay.
It's the hospital verifying a provider's medical school education, their state licensure, their board certification, criminal background, all of that.
Yeah.
It is basically answering the fundamental question like, is this person a legitimate, qualified medical professional?
Right. Making sure they aren't a fraud.
Exactly. Now, privileging comes after that. Privileging is the specific authorization granted by a hospital's governing board to perform exact, specific procedures at that specific facility.
Okay, let me make sure I've got my head around this. So credentialing is like proving you have a valid active driver's license. But privileging is getting the specific keys to drive an 18-wheeler carrying hazardous materials.
That is a perfect way to look at it, yeah. Just because you have a medical degree and a state license, which is the credentialing part, doesn't mean the hospital is going to let you just walk in and perform open heart surgery in their operating rooms.
Because you might be a dermatologist, right?
Exactly. You have to be privileged for that exact task based on your demonstrated competence. And the people guarding those keys, the ones actually building this invisible shield, are the credentialing specialists.
And just reading through the career guides we have for today's deep dive, these people are the unsung heroes of patient safety. Like, this is clearly not an entry-level file clerk kind of job.
Not at all. I mean, to even land a full-time role in this field generally takes about 6 years of preparation.
Wow, 6 years.
Yeah, you're usually looking at a 4-year bachelor's degree in healthcare admin or business, plus 2 years of hands-on experience in a medical staff office. Sometimes an associate's degree is accepted, but the level of expertise required is just immense because the liability is astronomical.
Right, because if they mess up...
If a credentialing specialist misses a red flag and an unqualified doctor harms a patient, the hospital can literally be sued into bankruptcy.
So the people checking the doctors have to be fiercely vetted themselves.
Precisely. These specialists usually seek out highly specific certifications, like the CPCS, that's the Certified Provider Credentialing Specialist credential from NAMSS. And just studying for that exam is a massive undertaking.
Wait, so the people checking the doctors have their own intense, super expensive credentialing system just to be allowed to check the doctors?
Oh, absolutely.
I was looking at the study materials for that CPCS exam, and just the online PDF study guide alone costs up to $249 for non-members And it's $329 if you bundle it with the accreditation standards grid.
It is not cheap.
And the fine print explicitly states that buying the guide doesn't even guarantee you'll pass the exam.
No, it definitely doesn't. It's a highly specialized, high-stakes profession. They are the absolute first line of defense for patient safety.
Well, if the stakes are so high that a hospital can be ruined by a bad hire, they can't possibly just be asking doctors to hand over a resume and, like, a photocopy of their diploma, right? How do they actually prove this person is who they say they are?
Yeah, they do not take the doctor's word for anything. The key concept here from the Grace Point checklist and the Las Palmas policy is the difference between primary source verification and secondary source verification.
Okay, break that down for me.
So, the hospital cannot just accept a photocopy of a medical degree because anyone with a laptop and a decent printer can forge a piece of paper.
Sure.
For the most critical qualifications like medical school graduation, residency completion, board certification, state licenses, the credentialing specialist must go directly to the source that issued the credential. That is primary source verification.
So how does that physically work? Are they just, like, picking up the phone and calling Harvard Medical School?
I mean, historically, yes, it involved a lot of phone calls and mailed paper transcripts. Today, it's mostly done through highly secure, encrypted digital portals directly linked to state medical boards and university registrars.
That makes sense.
But the principle remains exactly the same. The information must come straight from the source. Secondary source verification is only used for less critical things. Like, they might accept a notarized copy of your driver's license for an ID check, but the big stuff comes straight from the issuer.
And looking at this Grace Point checklist of things they have to verify, it is exhausting. We're talking about their full curriculum vitae, their DEA registration to prescribe controlled substances, proving they have malpractice insurance, and then there's the MPDB.
Ah, yes, the National Practitioner Data Bank.
Yeah, explain how that works, because it sounds like a permanent record for doctors.
That's exactly what it is. The NPDB is a federally mandated clearinghouse. If a doctor has a medical malpractice payment made on their behalf, or if a state board takes an adverse action against their license, it absolutely must be reported to the NPDB.
So they can't hide it.
Right. Hospitals are legally required to query this database during the initial credentialing process. And every single time the doctor is recredentialed, which happens every 2 years, it prevents a doctor who committed gross negligence in one state from simply moving across the country and starting fresh without anyone knowing.
Wow. And the checklist doesn't stop there. They have to verify immunizations, PPD status, which is the tuberculosis skin test, and life support training certificates.
It's a mountain of paperwork.
It really is. And here's where I get completely stuck. Looking at the Las Palmas policy, I found this wild detail. Any information obtained through primary source verification expires in exactly 150 days.
Yes, the 150-day rule.
Wait, if everything expires in 150 days, isn't that an administrative nightmare for the hospital?
Right.
I mean, if I have 500 doctors and every doctor has dozens of documents, I have stuff expiring every single day of the year. How do they keep up without dropping the ball?
Well, first, to answer why it's 150 days, it's roughly a 5-month window. It's a regulatory sweet spot.
A sweet spot? How so?
It's short enough that if a doctor's license is suspended, the hospital will catch it relatively quickly. But it's long enough to allow the massive bureaucratic wheels to turn without the paperwork expiring while the file is just, sitting on a desk awaiting a committee vote.
Okay, but how do they practically keep up with those ticking clocks? It sounds mathematically impossible for a human being to manage.
Oh, it would be impossible to do manually today. They rely heavily on complex credentialing software and database management systems. Modern credentialing relies on platforms like CAQH.
Which is what, exactly?
It stands for the Council for Affordable Quality Healthcare. Think of CAQH as a massive centralized digital vault where providers securely upload and self-report their data, and authorized hospitals can pull from it. They also use automated exclusion monitors like the OIGLI.
The OIGLA. We are drowning in alphabet soup here.
I know. Healthcare loves its acronyms. The OIGLIE is the Office of Inspector General's list of excluded individuals and entities.
Okay, and what does that do?
Think of it as the healthcare equivalent of a casino's black book. It's a constantly updating federal database of individuals who are legally banned from participating in Medicare or Medicaid, usually due to fraud or patient abuse.
Oh, I see.
Hospitals use software that continuously automatically scrubs their entire roster of doctors against this black book every single month. If a name pops up, alarms go off.
So you are relying on automated technology to maintain that invisible shield. But uh, what if you need a doctor right now? Say a hurricane hits or a global pandemic breaks out and the hospital is overflowing. You don't have 150 days or even 5 days to run background checks.
Right. In a crisis, things change. There are carefully managed exceptions for that, specifically called disaster privileges. The policy states that in a legally declared disaster, the hospital CEO can grant emergency rights to volunteer doctors. But, and this is critical, the shield doesn't drop completely.
So they don't just hand out scalpels to anyone who shows up in scrubs.
Exactly. The hospital must, at a bare minimum, verify the volunteer's valid photo ID and a current medical license right then and there. And then the clock starts.
The clock.
The hospital has a strict 72-hour window to complete the full primary source verification of that primary license, even in the middle of a disaster. If they can't verify it within 72 hours, the disaster privileges are automatically revoked.
That is incredibly tight.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's how they get in the door and how the hospital verifies they are who they say they are. But humans are human. Humans make mistakes.
They do.
What happens if the surgeon who looked amazing on paper starts slipping in the operating room? They're already inside the hospital. How does the shield protect you then? Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, this is where we move out of credentialing and into the realm of medical peer review and something called professional practice evaluation. And the hospital has a very structured, graduated response to human error. It starts with OPPC and FPPE.
More acronyms. Unpack those for us.
Right, sorry. OPPE is ongoing professional practice evaluation. FPPE is focused professional practice evaluation.
Okay.
When a doctor is brand new to a hospital, they don't just get free rein. They are placed on an FPPE, a focused evaluation. It's basically a probationary period where their first few dozen procedures or charts are heavily monitored and reviewed by senior peers.
And once they pass that, they move to the ongoing evaluation, the OPPE, where the hospital continuously tracks their complication rates, infection rates, length of stay metrics, constantly gathering data in the background.
Right. And if concerns arise from that ongoing data, let's say a surgeon's post-operative infection rate ticks up by a few percentage points, or maybe nurses start filing reports about disruptive behavior, the hospital doesn't immediately jump to firing them.
Right, they don't just kick them out onto the street.
No, the first step is what the policy calls a collegial intervention.
I found this part of the policy absolutely fascinating. A collegial intervention is described as an informal, constructive attempt to get the practitioner back on track. It could be a senior doctor sharing comparative quality data, or offering mentoring, or literally just taking the struggling doctor out for a cup of coffee to say, hey, what's going on with you lately? But the rules around this casual cup of coffee are super intense.
They are very strict.
Yeah, according to the Las Palmas policy, there are strictly no audio or video recordings allowed and absolutely no lawyers permitted during these initial collegial meetings.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can understand exactly why those rules exist. The goal of a collegial intervention is peer-to-peer education. It's about patient safety.
Right.
The moment you bring lawyers and recording devices into the room, it ceases to be a medical discussion and becomes an adversarial legal battle.
Because if the lawyer is sitting there, the surgeon is going to shut up.
Exactly. The hospital needs the surgeon to feel safe enough to say, you know what, I've been really exhausted lately, or I'm actually struggling to adapt to this new robotic surgical equipment.
They need honesty.
They want doctors to speak freely about clinical challenges so they can be fixed before a patient gets hurt. You simply can't have that vulnerability if someone is taking a legal deposition.
That makes total sense. But if the cup of coffee doesn't work, it escalates to a formal investigation. And then there are situations where a doctor bypasses the coffee entirely and loses everything instantly. The policy calls it automatic relinquishment.
Yes, automatic relinquishment means a doctor loses their privileges instantly without the right to a hearing. The hospital acts immediately to protect patients.
And the triggers for this are pretty stark. Obviously, criminal activity triggers it, like pleading guilty to Medicare fraud, violent acts, or drug offenses.
Sure, that's expected.
But it also happens for failing to attend a mandatory meeting or simply failing to complete medical records after warnings. I mean, think about this from the patient's perspective.
It's eye-opening.
If the doctor who is scheduled to take out your appendix tomorrow morning didn't finish their medical record paperwork from last week, the hospital will literally lock them out of the OR. Your surgery gets canceled because to the hospital, an administrative failure is a safety failure. If you don't do your paperwork, you can't operate.
It really underscores that being part of a medical staff is a conditional privilege, not an absolute right. Now, if a doctor does face a formal adverse recommendation based on their actual clinical competence, say, the medical executive committee votes to suspend them for more than 30 days because their surgical outcomes are genuinely unsafe, they are finally entitled to due process.
Right. They get the right to a hearing and one appeal. And this is where the lawyers are finally allowed to enter the room.
Finally, yes.
But reading through the hearing procedures, this is not a traditional courtroom. The policy states the burden of proof is heavily on the practitioner. They have to prove that the hospital's decision was arbitrary or capricious.
Let's translate that into plain English because it's a very high bar to clear. In a normal criminal court, the prosecution has to prove you did something wrong.
Right. Innocent until proven guilty.
Exactly. But in a hospital peer review hearing, the hospital says, "We reviewed your charts and we think you are unsafe." The burden flips. The doctor has to prove the hospital is acting irrationally.
Wow.
It's like a referee making a tough call in sports. You don't just have to prove the ref made a bad call. You have to prove the ref was fundamentally biased, malicious, or literally making up rules that don't exist. It is designed to heavily favor the hospital's right to curate a safe medical staff.
So we have this incredibly rigid, highly structured, checklist-heavy system. It's a world of 150-day expirations, primary source verifications, and strict peer review tribunals. But here is where the entire paradigm shifts.
This is the big pivot.
All of that rigid structure, it is actually being torn down and rebuilt right now.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the most critical part of our deep dive. We have to look at that recent February 2026 legal newsletter from JD Supra. It details a massive shift by the Joint Commission.
And just for context for you listening, the Joint Commission is the main accrediting body for hospitals in the United States. If a hospital loses its Joint Commission accreditation, they lose their ability to accept Medicare and Medicaid.
Which financially, essentially forces the hospital to close its doors.
Exactly. They hold the ultimate power. And in the summer of 2025, they rolled out a new regulatory initiative called Accreditation 360.
Which changes everything.
Reading this newsletter, Accreditation 360 is a massive philosophical pivot. The Joint Commission completely deleted over 700 requirements.
That's a huge number.
Yeah. And that's on top of 400 rules they already removed back in 2023. They are basically ripping up the rule book. They're replacing the old episodic 3-year triennial surveys with a continuous engagement model. They also replaced the old National Patient Safety Goals with National Performance Goals, or NPGs, which blend federal Medicare rules with aspirational objectives.
Right.
But hold on. They deleted over 1,000 rules to make things simpler. But as a patient, hearing that the hospital deleted a bunch of safety checklists sounds terrifying. It's like an airline saying they deleted 700 pre-flight checks to save time. Is this actually safer, or is it a trap for the hospital?
That is the exact tension the legal counsel in the JD Super article is highlighting. It's highly complex. The Joint Commission frames this as a burden reduction initiative.
Okay, so reducing red tape.
Right. The idea is that the old system was so bogged down in micromanagement that hospitals were spending more time checking boxes to please surveyors than actually looking at the patient in front of them. The shift we are seeing in 2026 is moving from process compliance to outcome-based certification.
What does that mean practically?
Process compliance asks, did you check the box? Did you hold the mandatory safety meeting on the second Tuesday of the month? Outcome-based certification asks, did the patient actually get better? Are your hospital's overall complication rates going down?
That sounds good in theory.
It does, but here is the catch. While framed as a burden reduction, the remaining rules are now much broader and more abstract in their language.
Right. The newsletter specifically points out that the old Survey Activity Guide, the SAG, is gone. It's been replaced by the Survey Process Guide, the SPG. And legal counsel is warning that this broader language introduces major ambiguity.
It absolutely introduces ambiguity. When a rule is a strict checklist, it's very comfortable for a hospital's legal and compliance teams. You either have the piece of paper or you don't. It's binary.
Yeah, black and white.
When a rule is rewritten as an abstract aspirational goal, surveyors now have much more subjective room to interpret whether a hospital is actually compliant. Under the old system, a surveyor checks a binder, sees the signatures, and says, you pass. Under Accreditation 360, a surveyor could walk in, look at the same binder, and say, well, you checked the old boxes, but looking at your data, I don't feel your outcome metrics align with the spirit of the new national performance goals.
So it shifts the power dynamic completely. It goes from, did you do the steps, to did you get the result?
Exactly. And the JD Super article provides a very neutral, objective analysis of this danger. Patient outcomes are influenced by numerous variables, many of which are completely outside the control of the individual doctor or the hospital.
Right, like if the patient has severe underlying conditions or lives in poverty and can't afford their postoperative medication, their outcome might be poor, regardless of how brilliant the surgeon is.
Exactly. If you de-emphasize the strict process compliance and grade entirely on outcomes, it's a grand experiment in hospital oversight. Hospitals right now are scrambling to align their bylaws with a rulebook that is suddenly much more philosophical.
We have covered an unbelievable amount of ground today. From the sheer dedication of credentialing specialists studying multi-hundred-dollar manuals to the relentless 150-day ticking clocks of primary source verification.
It's a complex world.
We've seen how hospitals handle human error through intense peer review tribunals, all the way to this massive 2026 Accreditation 360 overhaul that is fundamentally changing how hospitals are judged. So what does this all mean?
It's a huge shift for everyone involved.
It really is. And it leaves us with a final lingering question for you to ponder on your own. If Accreditation 360 successfully forces hospitals to focus entirely on outcomes rather than strict processes, how will this change who gets care?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. If a hospital's accreditation now relies heavily on their final patient outcome metrics looking pristine, will this inadvertently incentivize hospital leadership to revoke the privileges of doctors who take on the highest risk, most complex patients? As the rulebook shrinks, the stakes for your healthcare only seem to grow.
Something to definitely keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Stay insanely curious, and we'll see you next time.